We're so fortunate to have alumni and friends from all over the world that are registered for today's event. And so I invite you to share in the chat where you are currently located. We'd love to make sure that you all connect with each other and also to know where you are. So thanks for joining the 5th Texas Global Dialogues. This is actually the first one of 2022. And before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge Fiona Mazrenko, Twee Wynn, and Chris Smith. Twee and Chris are behind the scenes. I have to say that if it weren't for them and their assiduous work, we would not be together today. And so as always, I'm grateful to my colleagues and to the team at Texas Global more broadly. You may be aware that UT Austin has an unwavering commitment to global engagement. And at Texas Global, we really work to advance the university's mission by leading, supporting, and coordinating international engagement efforts across the world. We collaborate with 18 schools and colleges. We foster strategic partnerships on campus and abroad. We welcome thousands of brilliant international students and scholars to campus every year. And we create opportunities for our students and our faculty to engage with peers across the world. In my recent travels abroad, I had the distinct opportunity and the privilege to meet with some of you, alumni all over the world, and to listen to the ideas that you conveyed about what you thought would be the best ways to engage with the academic mission of the university. And so these conversations really led us to create the Texas Global Dialogues, and also led us to think really strategically about how we were going to support and how we were going to engage more deliberately with our alumni around the world. So we collaborated with our friends at the Texas X's and the executive director, Chuck Harris, whom you'll meet in a minute. And so these dialogues were originally planned to be in person. And I anticipate that they will be in person and that will actually be hybrid so that we can open them to various regions around the world. So if we are in South Korea next year, we will make this hybrid in person and synchronous so that we can welcome our alumni from other regions. But in addition to the dialogues, we also found it really important, crucial to create an infrastructure that would foster increased engagement with our alumni and as well as our collaboration with the Texas X's. We established a new global alumni relations team led by Fiona Mazrenko, whom you met just a few minutes ago. And prior to that, we talked about the other ways that we could engage with alumni, but that was prior to the pandemic. So I'm really delighted to say that now we're moving forward and that there's more travel that is resuming as a result. And I anticipate that we will be much more present with you. For those of you who haven't had the chance to join us at our other dialogues, I should say that these talks are really designed to bring together UT alumni and engage you in meaningful conversations with the university. We've hosted these virtually over the past 2 years. We are thrilled to continue our collaboration with the Texas X's. You know that the Texas X's has numerous chapters and networks in cities and countries across the world, and they continue to grow. And we encourage you to learn more about the Texas X's and the chapters and programs near you. But the one person who can tell you so much more about this and who's passionate about the work is my friend and colleague, Chuck Harris, Executive Director of the Texas X's. So Chuck, all yours.
Thank you, Sonia. I'll go quick since we're getting along on time here. Well, welcome everybody. It is a pleasure to partner with Texas Global to put these dialogues on. This has been something that we've sort of dreamt about for decades, really, is how do we bring serious-minded content from the university and sort of export that around the world. So it's great to do that. As Sonia said, we'll do it digitally, and we've learned a lot from that, and we'll continue to do that, and can't look forward to doing that in person. So again, Sonia, thank you for the partnership. We very much enjoyed it. And sort of on the subject of engagement, I thought I would put in a shameless plug. We've launched a new platform called UT Hooked In, which is think of it as sort of a LinkedIn for Longhorns, that we're offering all alumni to join, and it's a great way to connect. We've got folks from multiple countries on the platform today, but it's really a way sort of at scale to allow us all to connect in a platform and communicate real time. We're moving into sort of student mentorship and having the platform connect not only alums to each other, but students to each other. So look forward to encourage everybody to join that. It's a great way for us all to stay connected digitally. So again, with that, I want to thank everybody. And also Sonia said, if you're in a country or city with a chapter, please get involved. If you're in a country or city without a chapter, we'd love to talk to you about starting one. So if you have lots of energy and passion for that, we'd like to continue to spread the community around the world. So thank you for that. And Sonia, I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks so much, Chuck. And I agree. I'm so grateful for the partnership with the TextXs. And I know that there's so much to look forward to now that we're resuming our travel. So we've welcomed UT faculty and alumni to discuss a variety of topics with the past Texas Global Dialogues. And our most recent one was on global health. And before that, it was on artificial intelligence, journalism, and clean energy in 2020. So we're picking up a really exciting theme today. We're wanting to discuss energy, to examine more closely innovations in energy, advances in nanotechnology, and how these impact our lives. We'll also share exciting developments in UT Austin's collaborations with Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, or I will call it KAIST. And our event today is even more unique. It's really representative of that connectivity that we have on the human level, but also on an institutional level, because our panelists already share a connection. I'd like to ask our speakers to introduce themselves and their work to set the context for today's conversation. So first we have Dr. Brian Korgel. He's the chair of the Department of Chemical Engineering and the director of the UT Energy Institute.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Brian Korgel, professor at University of Texas at Austin. I'm in the McKetta Department of Chemical Engineering, not mechanical engineering. I started at UT in 1998. I do essentially a wide variety of types of research in nanomaterials chemistry, all the way from light emitting diodes to transistors to cancer detection. And one of the areas that my group has been working in a lot over the last 15, 16 years is in energy, especially in solar. We make solar panels, different kinds of solar cell materials, and as batteries as well. And I took over as the director of the Energy Institute at UT on September 1. So I'm looking forward to this discussion about energy and nanomaterials and our connection with Do-Chang Lee in KAIST.
Thank you so much, Brian. And you just introduced Do-Chang Lee. He's a fellow Longhorn alumnus and a professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering. And he's also the director of the Energy and Environmental Research Center and the Quantum Materials Research Center at KAIST in Daejeon, South Korea. And so I want to thank both of you, and I would love to listen to you, Do-Chang, as you introduce yourself to everyone here today.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Brian. My name is Do Lee. Someone from Korea calls me Do-Chang Lee. I usually go by Do Lee when I come talk to people in the States. Anyways, I'm a professor in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering, and also, as Sonia introduced, director of two centers at KAIST. One is Energy and Environmental Research Center and Quantum Materials Research Center. I'm working on various nanomaterials, which will be part of our discussion today, related to either energy or display applications. And I'm looking forward to discussing energy innovations and a lot of different materials innovation with Brian. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we start the conversation, I'd like to take just a few minutes to talk about the really robust relationship that we have with South Korea, and also specifically with KAIST. You may know that students from South Korea make up one of our largest international population on campus every year. It is one of the most sought after destinations for UT students to study abroad or conduct research. And South Korea has one of the largest concentrations of UT alumni in the world. So it is not coincidental that we're here today. We have many long-standing relationships with top institutions in South Korea, numerous faculty research and creative collaborations, and we recently signed a memorandum of understanding with KAIST after many years of partnership between our two institutions. Specifically, I wanted to mention our Global Innovation Lab. Texas Global has an entrepreneurship arm which partners with governments and nonprofit organizations, universities, and industry to train and support entrepreneurs in their communities and to overcome local challenges, to create jobs, and to drive sustainable economic development. We're very much present in South Korea. We're in also other nations, including Japan and Panama, and we've been in Nepal and India and so forth. But the Global Innovation Lab has really worked with KAIST, the KAIST Center for Innovation Initiatives, and the Korea Institute of Science and Technology Information in Daejeon to perform market research and international business development that's resulted in over $3.5 million in business deals for Korean innovators. So now we're poised to have an even deeper collaboration between our energy institutes to advance research and discovery, which brings us to this morning's conversation with Brian and Do Lee. And as we're speaking, I would welcome you to write your questions in the Q&A so that we can address them. We are going to leave time at the end to respond to these questions. But before we dive into energy and nanotechnology, Brian, I'd like to start with something a little bit more personal and lighthearted, and have an idea of your relationship with Do Chang Lee, and tell us about how you know him.
Oh wow, yeah. So I've known Do for a while. So this is funny. So Do was one of my PhD students, and I have to say, not picking favorites, Do was one of my favorites for sure, and has gone on to be one of my most successful students for my group, and was a joy to work with. So when I met Do when he came to UT, and he was looking for research groups, and we have this process where in the fall the students show up and they go around and they talk to faculty, and what they're supposed to do is talk to faculty and say, hey, I'm really interested in your group, and find several people they want to work with. And Do basically sat down in my office and said, I'm Do Chang Lee. I took a class. I learned about some of your papers. I want to work with you. And I told Do, I was like, no, that's not how the process works. So you're supposed to go around and find some various people you want to work with. And Do literally said, no, I'm here to work with you. And which maybe made me slightly nervous, but I took Do into my group, and he was very, very successful and productive, and a joy to work with. And it's been great to see him do so extraordinarily well in his career, and rise up through the ranks of academia.
Thank you. So one of my, I think, major flaws is that I'm really inquisitive, and so I can't help but ask. Though you were an international graduate student, as Brian just mentioned, here at UT Austin. I was wondering if you could share with us why you chose to pursue your PhD at UT, what your experience was like, and really what it was like to work with Brian as your faculty advisor. Is there anything that stands out for you in terms of your time here at Austin and with the group, with Brian's group?
How many hours do I have? It's going to be a long story, but I started at UT about 20 years ago, 2002, and as Brian mentioned, I was beginning my PhD program, and I just got admitted to UT. And UT, the right question is not why did I choose UT over other schools. It's why wouldn't I have chosen UT would be a right question, because at the time and still UT offers the great programs in chemical engineering across the subfields in materials, in biotechnology, energy-related research. So I was very into materials at the time, and the relatively young faculty members of UT, including Brian, they offered really, really nice program and made tremendous amount of progress. And it was no-brainer to pick UT over other schools. And when I joined the school, I was mesmerized by the progress that Brian has been making with relatively small group of people. I sat down with Brian, as he mentioned. I basically told him that I'm going to publish a lot of papers. How about that? And Brian says, "Oh, so do I." And that's how we kind of connected. And then I don't know if Brian remembers this. And the third or fourth day of my Korgel group era, our group went to a laser tag as a group. I don't know if you remember, it was 20 years ago, one kind of a chilly day.
I do remember that. I'd completely forgotten until you just brought it up, but now the memories are flooding back.
Yeah. And then I didn't have a car. I didn't have a, I had a driver's license, but at the time I didn't have a car. So Brian picked me up and gave me a ride to the laser tag. And I think he and two sons were in the car. And the younger son was asking me a lot of questions. At the time I wasn't, I didn't speak English. My English was relatively poor, and I had really difficult time talking to Colton, Brian's younger son. And he kept asking questions, very difficult questions. One of the questions that I remember is that he asked me, "Why is your name Doe?" And Doe is kind of a funny name. And Brian is like, "Colton, Doe is not a funny name." And all I can do at the time was to repeat the person who speaks in front of me. And I repeated what Brian said. And I said, "Colton, Doe is not a funny name." And then that was very quiet 20-minute drive after that. And I don't remember the rest of the day. I just remember the humiliation that I had with the conversation with the 5-year-old little guy. And then after that, I was so embarrassed to have this kind of conversation with my prospective advisor, because I may have humiliated his younger son in his car, and I kept my head down and worked my butt off for the rest of 5 years. And I went to UT in 2002. I graduated in 2007, and ever since, of course, Brian has been great in his academic career, and I tried to keep him in my role model, and that's basically how I came here as a professor at KAIST.
Thank you. Though this is a really inspiring story, and I know that some of us are really curious about the fact that you have developed a relationship over the last 20 years, that it's personal, but it's also very much professional. And many of us are here today to really listen to you about in terms of the work that you've done professionally. So I'd like to ask Brian, you work with innovations in energy that are shaping our future. And one of these innovations and the research that you're doing centers around nanotechnology. And some of us really know what nanotechnology is, others think we may know what it is. And it's a little bit for those of us who don't really have, the technology background, the scientific background. It's really intriguing, it's inspiring, and it makes us wonder about the impact of nanotechnology on everyday life. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the practical applications of your research. And then I can ask Doe about his research as well, but also how you've come together and what your goals are in terms of the two centers.
Yeah. So nanotechnology is really a lot of it is about material science and looking at different kinds of materials that are just shrunk down to structures that might consist of, say, 100 to 1,000 atoms. So what we do in my group is we try to figure out different ways of synthesizing these materials at scale. So instead of just making one little nanocrystal, we would call it, we want to make a big pile of these nanocrystals and then use them for various applications. So when you make a material that's small, you start to modify its properties. And what's really interesting from an engineering perspective is that we can tune the properties of materials by changing the size of those materials as opposed to mining the earth and finding some other material. Like if you want a color that emits red light, you can take semiconductor X and you can change the size to get that color out of it, for example. And so the most practical application of nanotechnology right now is in microelectronics. So transistors, the size of transistors has been scaled down. The smallest transistors are less than 10 nanometers. So you're talking about structures that are less than 1,000 atoms large, and we're manufacturing these on wafer scale and massive quantities. So transistors are in computer chips. Those are examples of nanotechnology. There are nanotechnology in televisions and displays. There is nanotechnology in cancer types of detection and things like that. So there's a wide variety of applications for nanotechnology.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this. Sorry, I had a technical issue here. Let me ask you this. You were talking about the distinct practical applications, and you had a colleague who was a PhD student at UT Austin, who's now Do-Chang, you're now a faculty member at one of the top institutions in South Korea, and you're the director of 2 centers. How does your research connect to what Brian is doing? When you're thinking about collaboration in the future, what would that look like? And how Brian talked about the applications, for example, on transistors and so forth. How does the connection happen in terms of research, collaboration, and so forth?
There's a lot in common between what Brian is working on and I'm trying to do naturally, because I learned a lot of things while I was in the Korgel group between 2002 and 2007 when I worked on nanomaterials. Right now, we are working on what is called quantum dots. That's one of the materials that we're working on. I don't know if you have heard QLED TV that Samsung has commercialized.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That QLED TV, which is a quantum dot based light emitting diode TV, that has this material that is called quantum dots. And that for those who are not familiar with this, the materials, just to give you a nutshell description, if you have material that is small enough and has some new and interesting properties, just like Brian mentioned, if you can change the size, you can change the color of the light that comes from these nanocrystals that can change. So you can have the size tunable properties. And once you do that, the beauty of this is you can control how accurate the color is that comes from the display, and compared to, I mean, if you compare QLED TV to say normal LCD TV or other types of TV, you can have as close to natural representation as you can get, and you will have so high color purity and so good spatial resolution that you'll have much better quality of displays. And that's one of the things that we are working on. As I mentioned, the quantum dots are very interesting and unique, and we've been working on this problem for over 10 years at KAIST. But at the same time, if you look at nanomaterials, there's some clue between the material and energy problem in a sense that if you look at how chemical reactions occur and how almost anything that occur in energy problems, you can address these problems, climate changes, energy problems, from the perspective of changing the way the chemical reactions occur, or change the molecules either in air or in water. And how you do that is to change the materials properties so that you can change the molecules in nanometer length scale or even smaller scale. For example, if you have CO2 in air, you can produce a catalyst material that can turn this CO2 back into more useful chemicals. And by capturing the CO2, you can address a lot of climate change problems. But that's a very nutshell description. It's not an easy challenge, but nanomaterials is the one that can facilitate and enables these kind of challenging problems just because of the size. And in this small size, a lot of things that can happen in molecular scale can be controlled. So chemical engineers have very great strength in this kind of area.
So just by listening to you for a few minutes and to Brian, there is, I think there's a commonality which is really apparent. The fact that you're both passionate and dedicated to your work. And I'm wondering if you could tell us what first drew you to nanotechnology. And you talked though about how this is something you've been working on for 10 years in terms of the microdots and the evolution of technology and its application to a myriad environments, whether it's for climate change or for television screens and so forth. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us also how you think the field has evolved since you started. So your passion, what drew you to it, and how, this is for both of you, how you think it's evolved since you started.
Do you want to go first, though, or?
Well, I can, either way, I can go. So, of course, when I started my career as a graduate student, as a PhD student, nanomaterials were relatively young field, and at the time, people were trying to find how to make nanomaterials in a controllable way, not knowing the broader impact of these materials in maybe in full capacity. I was really attracted to nanotechnology because of the possibility of these nanomaterials and nanoscience and all this, the materials that I'm working with can do in terms of different applications. So you can address a lot of different problems with these nanomaterials that attracted me to work with Brian and work with these nanomaterials.
Yeah, I'll just, so I got into, so I was originally really interested in biotechnology, so molecular biology. And when I was in undergrad, I went to UCLA as an undergrad. My major was chemical engineering, but I did this special program. It's called bioengineering option. So I was very interested in bio. And then I started my PhD in 1991, and I got into nanotechnology because my advisor went and he saw some talk and came back and walked in the lab and was like, "Hey, Brian, have you heard of quantum dots before?" And he was super excited. And of course, I didn't know what he was talking about. I'd never heard of quantum dots. And I was a bio person. I actually had never had a materials class as an undergrad. So he set me on this path of making quantum dots, and I took some classes and learned what materials were and everything. And I kind of fell in love with the materials. And at that time, what most people, spent doing from the early 90s to when Doe started as a PhD student was trying to make a wider and wider variety of different materials. So the chemical techniques really only were understood and were any good for like 4 different materials: gold, silver, and cadmium selenide, which nobody really cares about those things. I mean, we love gold and silver, but in terms of their usefulness, they didn't have a wide variety of usefulness. So when Doe started the group, my group had started working on things like silicon and germanium, and Doe really expanded a lot of that palette that we were doing in terms of different materials. And I think that's what's happened in the field over the last 20 years is now there's this huge library of different kinds of materials that can be made and are actually also found in these commercial applications like the televisions made by Samsung, these QLED TVs. So it's been a really transformative sort of period for me to watch the field go from people just trying to figure out how to make a quantum dot. What is a quantum dot? What are its fundamental properties? To now you can buy a TV with quantum dots, and it's been pretty interesting.
So you're talking about quantum dots and TVs and really utilitarian types of objects and so forth. But how do you translate that to the application of nanotechnology within the context of energy. And if you're looking at energy in Texas, I would assume that it's very different from energy, the use of energy in South Korea. So I'm wondering, for both of you, how are these advances or advancements impacting energy across our various landscapes in terms of our needs and so forth?
Well, I'll just say, I mean, I think the way energy is used, you know, in Texas or the United States and Korea is not all that much different, really. I mean, in terms of how energy and electricity power is generated and then used. A lithium-ion battery is essentially made of nanomaterials. So you've got two electrodes in a lithium-ion battery, a cathode and an anode, and the cathode is made of nanoparticles of lithium metal oxide materials. So that's one example of nanomaterials. So in our field, in the nanomaterials field, you've got these materials that have a wide variety of properties that can be applied to a number of different applications. And so batteries is one area. Another area that there's been a lot of work on is in solar cells. And so trying to use the really unique and sometimes exotic optical phenomena that you can produce from these nanomaterials to improve solar cells, for example. So that's another example of an application. Do you have others?
Yeah, I like to be piggybacking on what Brian has mentioned in renewable energy in solar cells or batteries. But I also like to add one more layer onto that by saying that in nanomaterials, by developing these nanomaterials and nanotechnology in general, our understanding on how materials interact with chemicals surrounding these materials can help us develop a new way of addressing energy problems. Maybe generating energy problems is one thing, addressing environmental issues is another. If you can generate energy using a light matter interaction in solar panels, and you can also store energy in lithium-ion batteries by understanding the matter, the nanomaterials, and the lithium-ion sort of or electrolyte interactions in batteries. That's going to advance the implementation of these technologies. But at the same time, eventually, to address the problem of carbon footprint, you will have to understand how certain chemicals interact with these materials chemically. Therefore, even though you're not necessarily generating energy using nanomaterials, you will have to address the problems of environmental issues by removing carbon dioxide, removing other toxic chemicals and things like that. So I would like to say that the chemical interaction between the chemicals and the materials is also very important thrust in the future research.
Thank you. That's really helpful. But you know, Brian, you mentioned that there's not necessarily that much difference between energy in South Korea and energy in Texas. And I guess my question is more about, I mean, yes, from the nanotechnology perspective, perhaps, yes, but when we're listening to dialogues or conversations about which energy is the best source of energy, and we're sitting in Texas, I think we hear something very different here than we may in another part of the world. And so I was wondering how that impacts your research, or how do you decide to focus more on one type of energy over another using nanotechnology based on where you're located. Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I would defer to Do to sort of fill in the, you know, kind of where the energy comes from in Korea, for example. So in Texas, we have a lot of natural gas. So natural gas is plentiful. There's a lot of wind, and there's a lot of solar. I bet there's not that much difference, but I don't know like how much coal is used in Korea and things like that. Maybe Do can respond to that. But in terms of like geographical location influencing the kind of research, at least that I've done, I don't know how much influence it's had on me, because I've been doing solar cell research for about 15, 16 years. And for a lot of that time, solar wasn't particularly popular in Texas, I would say. And it's becoming increasingly popular. And solar is a great resource in Texas. So it makes some sense to look at solar in that capacity. But yeah, politics is kind of can be polarizing politically in Texas. I'm not sure if it's that way in Korea or not.
South Korea has very different situation, obviously, compared to the situation in the States, and purely because we have very limited energy resources. In the US, 40% of energy consumption comes from natural gas, and 20% from coal, and 20% nuclear, and maybe about 20% from renewable energy. That renewable energy includes hydroelectric energy, but also includes solar energy and wind energy, wind power. In Korea, I believe it's 40%. So majority of the energy comes from nuclear energy. And because of the limited resources in gas and coal, we have much smaller amount of gas energy, and that also changes a lot depending on the global situations. For example, in the wake of the Russia and Ukraine conflict right now, we have very unstable gas supply, or at least unpredictable gas supply from other countries. That's because Korea is fourth largest, Korea is ranked number 4 in energy imports. That means our total energy balance, we have about 88% of energy comes from other countries. And because of these, our reliance to other countries in terms of energy resources, the way that we approach the energy problems is very different. And that's the very reason in Korea, the energy issues and technology development is going to be very, very important. Maybe the US has a little more time because they have more energy resources. In Korea, we don't have the luxury of waiting for just a few more years. We will have to develop something that can increase the energy efficiency, that can increase the stability of the energy grid and things like that. So we have very different situations from that point of view, but technologically, I co-sign with Brian. The development and technological development should go hand in hand, and we have to collaborate a lot to make things better.
So that's really interesting. I mean, you do talk about nuclear energy and how some countries are more dependent on that than others. And I'm thinking of France, for example, that's very dependent on nuclear energy. But I'm curious, because I've had the opportunity to be in several conversations with researchers from around the world who are interested in really focusing on smart cities and how you can create smart cities all the way from the architecture and the transportation and so forth to obviously energy and to that connects nanotechnology. And so one of the things that's been really interesting is to hear researchers that are working with UT faculty and that are in Mexico that are looking at creating clusters of research collaborations to work on smart cities and so forth. And so I'm wondering, in the work that both of you are doing, could you tell me a little bit, talk to us about how the advancements that you just discussed in nanotechnology and in energy are going to impact the urban experience, how they're impacting it now without us knowing it, but how you envision that they will be impacted in, let's say 10, 20 years. I mean, what does the future look like? You've been working on this for, a couple of decades. There's been a progression. What do you envision will happen as researchers are also are looking at smart cities and designing smart cities and so forth?
Well, I'll say one thing is I think we need to consider, how people live more than just simply technological advancements. And so, I was at a meeting with some of my colleagues today talking about e-mobility. So, electric vehicles and that sort of thing. And if you think about where you might want to position a charger for an electric vehicle or a charging station, there might be this cheap piece of land that looks really great. You can get the electricity there and all of that. But if it's kind of too far away, nobody's going to use it and it's not going to be functional. And I think when we think about smart cities and the kind of technologies that are available, taking into account the human component, so how people actually live, like the flow of human movement and interactions and things like that is really key. And I think engineers for a long time haven't been used to thinking about society in that way. We just want to come up with the better battery with the 20% more storage capacity.
I'd like to add one thing too. When you think about the urban environment, the future urban environment will have to consider the energy problems. How do we efficiently use energy? How do we address the problems of the environmental issues? So far, the R&D and investment has been placed on energy supply. How do we create efficient energy supply or energy generation, electricity generation? From in the future, I think the R&D will look at more and focus more on energy consumption, as more and more energy will be diffused and should be generated more locally than centrally. And to be able to do that, renewable energy is one way of doing it, but because of the cost analysis and because of the cost inefficiency, it's going to take a lot of, you'll have to create procurement from maybe state government or federal government to support the initial sort of R&D and investment in this energy consumption sector. So instead of thinking about how do we generate electricity in central fashion, you will have to think about how do we distribute this energy generation across the urban city. And that's going to, what I believe is going to be very important. I have this term OECD, optimize, electrify, capture, and decarbonization. So we'll have to optimize the energy supply and consumption, and electrify by having, you'll have to turn everything into electric energy instead of bringing all these fossil fuels around, and you'll have to capture carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, and decarbonization to the same thing. You'll have to turn this carbon dioxide into more useful chemicals.
Don't you think, though, that not having a diverse portfolio of energy sources is going to have a negative impact on just the world in general? We've seen power grids going off the grid, I would say. We've seen all sorts of flaws or breaks in terms of energy. And so I'm wondering, as I asked you earlier, and I've seen a question from one of your former students, both you, Brian, and Do, from Samju. He's asking, if you're looking at the next 10, 20, 30 years into the future, what potential advancements in nanoparticles and nanostructures excite you most personally? So thinking about all of that and energy, what are how would you answer that question?
I've been really super interested in wearable electronics and devices, and I think that's an area where, if you look at our clothing, for example, so this is something that has been a dream of mine. I don't know if we'll ever achieve it, but to make the shirt that you're wearing, it acts as a solar cell. It powers the electronic devices and sensors that you carry with you as you're walking through your smart city and interacting with everybody else in the smart city to do what we do, and I guess become more productive. Then there's a debate about what does it mean to be human and all of that. But I think that nanomaterials have the ability you can combine and create materials with properties that don't exist in nature. So something that's stretchy, but you can make a display out of it, or a computer chip or something like that. So I think that's still a really interesting area of advancement.
Yeah, my 10-year-old son is a big fan of Avengers, the Marvel movie series, and I think in the final episode of the Avengers Endgame, I don't want to spoil the movie for those who didn't watch it, but the Iron Man was wearing the kind of a flexible suit, a self-propagating suit, and what he mentioned when he explained this to the fellow Avengers was that this is nanotechnology, and that actually attracted or enthused my son Sangjun for more than the movie did to me. And he was so excited about nanotechnology, and I told him that I'm working on nanotechnology. Then he was like, "Oh, are you going to create an Iron Man?" And I agree. We are not making Iron Man, but we are going to do something similar in the context, in the sense that we can personalize the energy generation and consumption, and creating the Iron Man suit is maybe a little too far at this moment, but I don't think it's necessarily completely far-fetched. You can have something on your body, very personalized devices, and at the same time clothing. So I completely agree with what Brian said.
So I'll give another interesting application that's a smart city thing, are different kinds of functional windows, for example. So where you have window materials that absorb light, you can see through them, absorb light, they have but then convert that to electricity. So you can actually make these windows, you can fill the glass with quantum dots to absorb the light. They actually fluoresce and re-emit the light laterally, and you can put solar cells on the edge of your windows, so you can take windows and start to get different kinds of functionality. And also, if you then introduce the ability for them to change color, so call that electrochromic type of windows, now you have I think once those things come online and people start living with windows that generate electricity and also change color through the day or change transparency, we'll wonder why we didn't always have these things. We'll become
That makes me think
spoiled.
of, I think BMW just came out with a car that changes color. So I'm wondering if they're using that technology. But this brings me to a question in closing for me, because we have some questions from our friends in the audience, which is that we've determined that you're both very passionate, that you have this connection that's lasted several decades, and you're both directors of energy institutes at stellar institutions. So that begs the question, what do you think the opportunities are for collaborations between both institutes, between UT and KAIST? And what do you think each of our locations offers for the work that you do? Or maybe it doesn't offer, but maybe it doesn't matter that you're in Daejeon and that we're in Austin. But I think that, there's something pretty admirable about the fact that you now are both heading up energy institutes at top institutions around the world. So tell me a little bit about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, for me, I think the opportunities to collaborate between UT and KAIST are pretty huge. Samsung is a very important institution, I suppose, within South Korea, and then it also in Austin. We have a very large fabrication facility here. That's part of it. I think I think international collaborations are fundamental to what we do at the university. Partly to get the different perspectives of the work we do, how what we do impacts people in different ways, sometimes depending on where you live, and taking that into account. And I think your question, Sonia, about what's different between energy, production and use in Texas or the United States and in Korea, and the perspectives are very different, like you said. So Texas is the largest energy producer in the United States. We're also the largest energy consumer, and that shifts our focus. And if we're thinking about energy on a global scale and what we need to do, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions is fundamental to what's happening in terms of energy research and energy development, then being able to work with partners with different perspectives on what that means, how it impacts local communities, is really important, so that we're doing work that's meaningful on a global scale, not just meaningful to Austin or something like that.
Yeah. Speaking of Samsung, KAIST and Samsung have very unique and strong tie to one another. And recently we are even creating a department in response to the contract with Samsung. And we are nurturing semiconductor specialists as an undergraduate students. And based on this relationship with Samsung, I believe we can work with UT in terms of addressing the relieving some carbon footprint in semiconductor industry in general, and work with a lot of other efficiency problems in semiconductor manufacturing. But on top of that, we, as I mentioned, Korea in general has very different sort of a landscape in terms of energy issues. As a director of the Energy and Environmental Research Center. When we look at the problem of one of the countries that import energy from other countries the most in the global, let's look at this. USA total energy consumption in the past 2 decades. So since I met Brian, the energy consumption didn't change. The total energy consumption didn't change. I mean, the population increased slightly, but interestingly, it decreased last year because of the pandemic. But barring this slight decrease, it didn't really change. Korea, the increase in the past 2 decades is by 50%. In the same period of time, China had this energy consumption increase by 200%. So it increased 3 times. Okay, so that means we are basically catching up on US and European countries in terms of energy consumption per capita. And once we have more developed, if our system gets more developed in terms of better technology and better way of life, then the energy per capita is going to go up and it will saturate at some point. Right now, it's something like 80% of energy consumption per capita to the United States, but only the major difference between these 2 countries is the US has the energy resources. We don't. So we will have to eventually address the problems of how do we use this energy more efficiently. You want to decrease energy consumption per capita by significantly, so by a lot, so we can have more sustainable energy use and supply. I mean, Korea has relatively smaller land. We are 100 times smaller than US. To be exact, it's 99 times smaller than the land of the US, and 7 times smaller than the state of Texas, and 6 times smaller than France. So that's how I learned that Texas is bigger than France. But the population is only 6.5 times smaller. That means we have huge problems of the population density that leads to the energy and environment problem as well. So to address all these issues, I think we will have to make sure that we collaborate with the prestigious Energy Institute at UT, and working with Brian is like, living the heaven once again, because that was the best time of my life in between 2002 and 2007, not because of the Vince Young and national championship, but because I worked with Brian for the 5 years, and collaborating again with Brian is going to be, dream come true again. So thank you.
This is so wonderful. Listen, I think it's been a really insightful conversation, enlightening. And for those of us who are not in the field, it brings even more of our curiosity to the table. I'm like your 10-year-old son who watches the Avengers and thinks, oh, this is so great. Will it ever happen? Will we ever have that kind of a suit? So we have a few questions from our friends around the world. One is from Tomisin Latino, and he is asking what major challenges you've encountered in research involving technology, and how do you deal with those challenges?
Well, I would say, I mean, there are challenges in terms of trying to accomplish something in the lab, but yeah, I mean, I think sometimes what are the biggest challenges? I mean, trying to get to net zero, carbon emissions by 2050, for example. Like, how do you do things like that? And in general, thinking about making people's quality of life better, and then relating that to the science that you know how to do. I think for me, that's probably the biggest challenge that I find. I guess maybe even the older I get, the more I want my work to impact people's lives, in a positive way. So making that link from the science that we can do to solving the world's problems, I mean, that sometimes seems insurmountable to me.
Yeah, in 2000, I think in 2021, the carbon dioxide emission decreased by 8% compared to the previous year. Energy consumption decreased by 4%. And considering the population increase during that time, that's very significant. And Brian mentioned that carbon net zero by 2050, and some different countries have different sort of agenda. But if you try to make net zero emission by 2050, that was agreed in 2015 by different countries. If you want to do that, you will have to have this 8% decrease every year until 2050. So we had this, the strongest pandemic in our life, and that causes this 8% decrease. But you will have to have this kind of impact every year. So it's going to be 8% decrease on top of this previous decrease every year to get to net zero. And that's going to be a big challenge, not just technologically, but also socially, politically, and culturally. That's going to be a big issue. How do we solve this problem? Can we solve this problem using just nanomaterials? I'm not sure about that, but we'll have to work really hard. That's why this collaboration is going to be very important. We'll have to understand how we can change people in different fields, different disciplines to get to work on this problem.
Thank you. That's I think, like many goals that are created with distinct countries and political agendas, we can always aspire to arrive at those goals, but usually it's really aspiring. It doesn't mean that you're going to reach those goals. We have a question from Julian Bantayan, and she asks, what are some pros and cons between high and low population densities in terms of energy use and environmental consequences?
I'll go first. Typically, a higher population density, it's going to lead to higher energy efficiency, but at the same time, you will have some environmental consequences more significant than when you have a lower population density. That's kind of an intuitive way of looking at the problem, but I don't think we can change our land unless we, I don't know if this is appropriate, but unless we unite with North Korea anytime soon, we can't expand our land. We can't go beyond what we are given in our peninsula. And we are expecting the population to decrease over time eventually, because our birth rate is really the lowest in the countries across the world. But that's not the way, that's not really healthy way of decreasing the population density. So energy and I think energy and environmental perspective, you don't want to have higher and higher population density because eventually you'll have to solve the environmental problems, and that's going to be more and more difficult. But just considering the urban environment, the higher population density brings you one really nice thing, which is you can have better creativity when you have relatively large cities and cities with a high population density, and that's only resource we have. We don't have natural resources. We have only humans that can contribute to technological development. So hopefully, the situation that we are in, which is higher population density, is going to turn us into very innovative society that can solve the problems in totally new way. That's all I can have right now.
Thank you. Someone asked this question, and I'm really curious about it as well. You know, we all come from different countries, and some of us come to the U.S. to study in the U.S. And from personal experience, I would say, having been born in a country where the educational system is very different, I can see the positive in distinct educational systems. And so when it comes to science and specifically studying nanotechnology, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit if there are any differences between the study of nanotechnology in the US versus in South Korea. And I think my colleague Tui asked that question.
You want me to go, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I have my perspectives. You know, live the life and in both places. So I think yeah, I'd like to hear your perspective.
Yeah. Very short answer is no. There's no difference. Practically no difference. We work on the problems, maybe almost the same problems that people in the States are working on and research-wise. But what I realized in the past 10 years or so as a professor at KAIST was that there's a little bit of time delay in what government is trying to focus on. For example, once the United States or federal government makes a strong emphasis on one problem, and there's going to be something like 2-year delay that our government is trying to implement more funding on that particular problem, particular topic as well. So it's not necessarily the problem of the researchers, but it looks like government is moving a little behind the schedule. That causes that kind of a discrepancy.
Interesting. Brian, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Do is saying in terms of the problems, I think if you go back 20 years ago or so, there was more of a difference between research, definitely in the field of nanoscience in the US and Korea, and that might be true in a few other fields as well. But the world's really changed a lot in the last 20-25 years, and if you compare the state of science in nano in a variety of different countries across the world, it looks pretty similar in different places. Whereas there's more of a difference, I would say, between the US and a lot of the rest of the world 25 years ago.
Thank you. So it's interesting because that actually will bring you to it makes the collaborations a lot easier because you're essentially speaking the same language. You're approaching challenges in similar ways. So that's really encouraging. And we have one final question, which is, aside from costs of production, what are some challenges you've seen in the field with regards to clean energy, and how can nanotechnology address that?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the challenges, say in solar, if you go back 15 years ago, it really was just very, very high costs of production and making solar cells, work well enough. These days, I think that's less of an issue. Solar cells have gotten really quite inexpensive to manufacture. They work pretty well. So now some of the largest challenge is just the amount of investment that needs to happen to scale up, deploying more solar out in the field. I think that's some of the challenge. There's going to be a challenge with when you start increasing the amount of storage, like battery storage, to deal with intermittency. Most of those batteries are lithium-ion batteries, and lithium is a critical mineral, and where is that mined and things like that, that potentially could become a challenge in terms of natural resources or raw materials is one issue. What did you think, though?
I agree. I mean, most of the new technology in energy field is based on nanoscience and nanotechnology. And if you talk about photovoltaics, if you talk about energy storage in lithium-ion batteries, you will have to understand and eventually overstand the problems of how small chemicals or even light particles interact with the materials in different length scale. But then nanomaterials come into play and make very innovative and new way of thinking, and you can make some breakthrough in energy fields simply by understanding nanomaterials and nanotechnology. So I completely agree with what Brian mentioned.
I think one of the holy grails, which maybe nanomaterials could help with, is it's called direct air capture of CO2. So basically trying to reduce the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere just by putting materials around or something like that. And people are working on different solutions to that. But some of those potential solutions could be nanomaterials that would use sunlight to convert the CO2 from the atmosphere into something else like vodka, which sounds funny, but there's actually a company that does CO2 capture and makes vodka. But you can make other things as well with CO2. So the idea is you capture the CO2 from the air, you reduce global CO2 concentrations, and you convert that CO2 to different kinds of materials or potentially reuse it as fuels. And there are approaches using nanomaterials to do that.
So fascinating. I hope that our friends that are on the webinar with us are just as intrigued as I am. And I imagine that many of them are actually more connected to the field of nanotechnology than I am. But it's been a really enlightening conversation. I think if anything, next time we meet, we should meet in Seoul and Daejeon, and essentially have our alumni with us and continue the conversation. I know that Chuck Harris is with us, and he may have some more thoughts on how we're going to make sure that we come together in the near future. Chuck, did you want to talk a little bit about what we're hoping for the future in terms of engagement with our alumni? Hopefully we'll be in Korea at some point.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to partner with Brian on the newest Texas vodka startup, where maybe we can take give Tito's a run for his money with the nanoparticle conversion to vodka. So I definitely want part of that if we're gonna make that happen. No. Thank you, Sonia. No, we're just real high level. We're working really hard to perfect our data, learn more about where our alumni are, how do we connect them, better data, so that we can just make sure we're sort of connecting with everybody so they can share in great events like this. And so we're super excited. This is great topics, but allows us to get good data on folks all around the world. So anyway, Brian, let me know if you come up with that startup. I want to be an angel investor in that thing. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Well, can't we do it with soju too? Can't we?
Absolutely.
You can do soju, you can do somac.
We'll franchise it. We're gonna
I
franchise.
think maybe we
all
should
around the world.
have a gathering in Dijon where we combine, the soju and the vodka and compare. So listen, it's been really wonderful. I'm so excited that we had the opportunity to bring both of you together. It was a little bit serendipitous. We have had the partnership with KAIST for many years, and then we've expanded it. It's an institutional partnership, which means that there will be more and more collaboration, more faculty engagement, and as always, as I said earlier, our students are really driven to go to South Korea to study. So this has been a really wonderful evening or morning for you all. So I'd like to thank all of you and all of our alumni who joined us today. And I hope that you took as much away from the session as I did, that you learned more about nanotechnology, innovations in energy, and the exciting collaboration between UT Austin and KAIST. I can say that in a few days, we are going to send you an email with a recording of the event and a brief survey. We really need to hear from you. We want to hear your thoughts about not only today's events, but also the kinds of topics that you're interested in hearing about in the future. And we also invite you to join us again later this spring for the next Texas Global Dialogues. So if you're not already, make sure that you're subscribed to our newsletter. Make sure you go to Hooked In as well, as Chuck mentioned, and so you can get the latest news and updates. Also, Hooked In is really it's an exclusive online networking community for UT alumni. And make sure you follow us on social media to learn about these and other events hosted by Texas Global and by Texas X's. So I want to thank you again for attending, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. And we are going to see you soon for the next Texas Global Dialogues, and hook 'em. Thank you so much.